All right. So today we are going to be talking, like I said, about tie-in points. Hey, Aussie Arborist, what is going on? Good day to you as well. Got a bunch of people that have joined. We've got Parkway Trees. Ben, thank you for the suggestion, man. Very good suggestion of a topic. And hey, Alex is joining. He is my first paid consultant client for the tree service stuff. If anybody else wants to have an hour of consultant about your business, what you're setting up, even tree problems you're dealing with or whatnot, believe me, if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and you ain't gonna pay for something that you're not getting your money's worth. But if you need some help with some stuff, if you want it refined down to your niche, then let me know, and I'm more than happy to help you guys out where I can. And we'll go over that. But also got to give a big shout out, of course, to my sponsors. Thank you, Weaver, Gap Arbor Supply, Just Send It Sauls, and of course my affiliate arbshirts.com. Please go by there and check out what they've got. If you look under the elevated office topic, anything you buy under there is a design that I made, and those designs, if you buy them, I get a small commission off of that. Very good. Also have Patreon members. So Sean Thompson with a Tattooed Arborist is one of my Patreon members. Also, I've got Mars Gia. I've got BZ Arbor Care, which is Brian. And then I've got Ruben Craighead. So there we go with that. Before we get into the main topic, though, which is very, very good, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, I did get some new stuff in the mail, and I wanted to show it to you guys because, well, new stuff is always cool stuff, right? So this here is my new ring lanyard. It's my new Yale ring lanyard, 16-footer. I climb on the ring a lot. So real quick, difference between the ring and a, what's it called? The Tritech is this stuff isn't quite as harsh in the hand. It's a bit more, it has a better hand to it. It doesn't get as stiff as easy. And I also run a Yale ring on one device, and I run Tritech on another device because I run with two lanyards. And what that does is it allows me to differentiate easily between which lanyard is which. So if I want to use my Zillin, I know that my Zillin is on Tritech, for instance, right now. So I grab the Tritech. If I want to run the Grion, I grab the Yale ring because that's what's on Yale ring. And I know instantly, visually, it's much easier than having two of the same ropes as your lanyards. It's just a little ticket there to help you grab stuff easier. Also, I use different color carabiners on the ends. That way I know what is what. But that's, you know, just a personal preference thing. All right, so I got something that I've been waiting for that I'm going to give a go. And I'm super stoked on this. So here we go. Yeah. Got the new Zigzag Plus. Never had a Zigzag. I have climbed on it a little bit. Super stoked on climbing on this thing. So I will be testing it out on the Kern Master and also on the I have a piece of Scandier that I might try it on. It's kind of past its life for climbing, but I'll do some low angle climbs on it and see what I think of it on Scandier. And I also, of course, have Blue Moon, Gap Vantage, and if I get Calamine next, I'll try that or one of the other lines. I don't know yet. XTC or somebody recommended, I think it was Colaric recommended Samson something or another. Yeah, Brian, mechanicals are a different world and they're great. So I will say that I really like the way that Prusiks tend in SRS or SRT form. I really do. It's just so smooth up. But I do prefer mechanicals for descent personally because I find that they just don't cinch down as much as like the knots do. It's just a personal thing. I'm not saying one is bad and one is good. But I also got Yeah. So this is, of course, going to go with the Petzl. And I'll be trying this, even though technically not specified for this. I will be trying the chicane with just friction knots, like, you know, the Fitch hitch and various things, and see what I think of it as well. So yeah, some reviews coming up on that stuff pretty soon. By the way, if you haven't ever seen the Petzl chicane, which they also call the auxiliary brake, the chicane is actually a little bit better than I thought. I thought that this was always plastic because of the texture it has in the photos and stuff. It's not. It's actually metal. It's aluminum. So, yeah, I was really surprised about that. And that was a nice and pleasant surprise. It makes it definitely a little bit better off than just it being like a piece of plastic, right? That's whatever. So, they did a pretty good job of developing it. It looks very much like the ID or whatever, you know, with the swing gate on it. You have 2 safety switches here. These are things that I had no idea about it. So you have to push them both in, but they are beveled on one side, so they all close up. So yeah. So there you go. Now I will say, just so you know, the Zigzag Plus and the chicane are probably one of the most expensive setups you can have for SRS or SRT climbing. Is it worth the money? I don't know. I have to test it out and see. Based on what I've experienced with the Zigzag in the past, it's really going to be boiling down to how much you prefer that fluid and smooth proficiency of the Zigzag versus like a slightly clunkier feel of like the rest of them. Okay, that's basically what it's going to boil down to. So keep that in mind. However, one of the big trade-offs that you give for a Zigzag is that it's not midline attachable. And there are many guys out there, such as, Adrian Laurel 52 says he hates that it's not midline attachable. I agree. However, that all being said, some really good climbers out there, like Zach Richards for one, says that even though the Rope Runner Pro, which he climbs on, is midline attachable, he never midlines attaches it. He just throws it through the crotches and it lives on the rope. So it's very dependent on your own style of climbing and how important midline attachment is to you. So that may or may not really be a trade-off for you. Now, it is more expensive, there's no doubt. The chicane is $180, I think, or $160 or something like that. And the Zigzag Plus is $260, maybe? I don't even remember. My scales of prices are a little skewed because I get a discount from Gap Arborist Supply as their sponsored as one of their sponsored climbers. So I don't remember all the prices exactly. So total, it does come out to be a bit more expensive than like the Akimbo would be, or the Zigzag. I mean the what's it called? The Rope Runner Pro, or any of that stuff. Okay, just so you know. All right, so that's that. Now, man, Sean hasn't showed up yet, I don't think. Hey, cool Eric. Sean hasn't showed up yet, but I'm going to go ahead and show off some of what he got me. So he got me this really cool recoil sticker. I've never actually seen this sticker. It's pretty sweet. I like that a lot. And some of this I'm not going to show because some of my sponsors would be less than happy with me. Sorry guys, that's just how life goes. I hate that that's part of it, but the part of it is the reality of being sponsored, and that sponsorship does a lot more for me than it harms me. So let's see what else I've got here. Don't worry, I've got plenty to show you though. Yep. Okay, so he got me a Petzl keychain, which is pretty sweet. I'm not a Petzl fanboy by any means. I do like Petzl, but I'm not like a diehard Petzl fan. But that's pretty cool. It's like a rubberized keychain, so that's sweet. Look at these stickers that Sean, a tattooed arborist, has got. How rad is that? Yeah, that's pretty cool. So he gave me a couple of those. He gave me this one here. Yeah. So he gave me a couple of those. And he gave me that one, which is pretty cool too. I don't know if the camera's getting it in focus, but yeah. Big Hairsy says that he's a fanboy of Petzl. Haha. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people are diehard fans of brands. I've never been that way. I'm going to go off on a small tangent here. I've never been a diehard fan of any one brand simply because no company is perfect, and even companies that I don't particularly like the average product as a general rule, sometimes they come out with something that's like really good, and it's a one-off piece of equipment that's actually pretty good. One example of that is CMI. Not a huge fan of CMI overall, but CMI has a couple of pieces of equipment that I think are really, well thought out. Like, for instance, the, what's it called? The rope jack. I think it's a really good piece of equipment. BZ Arbor Care says, open discussion, impression on the full recoil chainsaw lanyard. Worth the money? Yes, totally. In my opinion, yes, it is. I don't think it's the only solution, but it is a very good. I haven't tried the CMI Micro, so I can't say on that. But the recoil lanyards, both of them are very good. I like them. I have the freedom to speak about recoil because that was part of my deal with Weaver. Weaver has some cool lanyards that we're developing right now, but they're not the same thing as what recoil is. And if you want, so the one thing to know though, in my opinion, is that the recoil isn't as perfect as some people want to make it out to be. And that's not to put it down. I just think it's fair that you view it for what it is. So it is very tight, compact, and it has a really good reach on it, okay? But with time, it gets twisted. And I find that when I'm doing cross-body cuts, it often gets caught on my lanyard or the rope, and I have to kind of like finagle it over it a little bit. It's not a big deal. I don't want to make it sound like a big deal. It's really good. It's just, it's not absolutely perfect because no product is perfect, okay? If you ever hear somebody, oh, this is the greatest product ever, it changed the world and it's the perfect thing. Lies, all of it, okay? Just sorry, it's not true. There's always a fault in a product. If that was the case, products that were developed 20 years ago that were revolutionary and everybody thought were awesome would still be the exact same today. But they're not. Because there's always adjustments that we can make and always things that can be better, okay? So if you like it, fine. If the pros for that product are worth it, buy it. But don't get on the hype wagon of it being the best product ever and it's the perfect solution for arborists today. Not going to happen. Okay. Still Hates Height said, well said. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ruben said, I just got a recoil and love it. Check out my latest post. I have a good lanyard moment. Yeah, that's where the saw caught, the trunk caught your saw, isn't it, Ruben? And it pulled it out of your hand. Which is actually a topic I will talk about in the future. So keep an eye out on that, making snap cuts and not getting your saw caught in them. Okay, because that's a common occurrence as well. And it's something you want to watch out for. But today, we are not talking about Ruben's problem. We will talk about that in the future, though. Today, we are going to talk real quick about, that's a lie. It's not going to be quick because I'm very rarely quick with what I talk about. BZ Arbor Care says, I use the Weaver webbing ring lanyard. I think it's the bomb and cheap. Yeah, they're really good. They don't tend to cinch up as tight as the recoil for sure. For guys like me that are 6'2", some of the standard traditional bungee and webbing lanyards are at times too short, so keep that in mind. Whereas the recoil is much longer. But because I work with Weaver, we're trying to resolve that problem for you guys in the future as well. All right, so selecting tie-in points and testing them, both from the ground and while in the tree. Hold on. Big Hairsy 15 says, what advice would you give an apprentice such as myself in regards to equipment? I feel like I follow the sheep. You know what? So we'll go over some of that in the future, but this is a topic, Big Hairsy, that I really think is better suited for a private consultation. And I'm not trying to sell you a consultation. It really depends on you and what you're climbing. Why don't you reach out to me in a DM and we'll talk a little bit and see what I can help you out with. Okay? And if you feel like a consultation is right for you, then we can do that. But maybe I can get you set in the right direction without one. Okay? I'll make, so if you are like in school and you're trying to learn something and you need some like one-on-one advice from somebody else, let me know. I do give discounts for people that are in school, and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. I want to give you the right direction on that. And I think that, you need to know what it is that I need to know what it is that you're climbing, where you're climbing, what kind of trees you're climbing, what your climbing style is, and how advanced climbing you are to get you in the right equipment. Just so you know. Okay. So picking tie-in points. This is kind of, I feel like I need to make a few disclaimers here. Ben, this is your topic as well. Please step up and let me know if I'm missing something, or if I'm off point in your opinion, okay? Guys, ladies, whoever's watching, I'd never, ever, ever have a problem with you guys questioning what I'm saying or being doubtful if you feel like it's wrong, because I'm not perfect, okay? I have no problem as long as you're respectful about it. Let's keep it respectful. There's no need to become violent, because I guarantee you I'm not trying to steer anybody wrong, all right? And I'm willing to listen to what you got to say and be better at what I do and convey better information to everybody out there, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, so the most basic way of setting a tie-in point, of course, is going to be from the ground. That's what everybody starts with. And I deal with a bunch of sketchy species of trees out here. They're really hard to predict. So just to give you guys a rehash of what I climb, predominantly Aspen, which are a very, very weak form of poplar family. I climb a lot of weeping willows, a lot of corkscrew willows, a lot of Aussie or glow willows. I also climb a lot of cottonwoods, big leaf and narrow leaf, so plains cottonwoods, and the narrow leaf variety that are more mountainous, which suffer from a lot of decay out here. They are really poorly structured by nature in their growth. A lot of really tight included branch unions that have long, like 6 or 7 inch long inclusions on them. Not ideal. I climb a lot of maples, same thing. Very tight included areas, very spindly, very brittle. And those are the main thing that I climb. I mean, like 90% of my life climbing is on those kinds of trees. Okay, so I have to be even more careful in certain ways about what I'm climbing. It's not like an oak tree, which oaks have their own limits and things, but they definitely have their, their strengths to them. Okay. We do have locusts, which are pretty strong. I climb those a little bit. We have some, a lot of fruit trees like apples and stuff that are kind of big, crab apples and things like that. We have a lot of elms. Elms are definitely better. I can get way out on a branch end of an elm, tie off and hang, and it'll be like a noodle, but it won't break on me as easily. Whereas a cottonwood would just snap off on me. Okay. So that kind of gives you, trees of paradise. We have a ton of those things, or tree of heaven. That's what it is. And they're awful. And they break a lot too. So with all of that in mind, I do push limits climbing with my tie-in points because I've become familiar. I can't show you guys on Instagram very well. I would like to, and I'm going to if I can ever get YouTube to be more stable. But on Instagram, I just can't share screen videos. So sorry, not while we're doing a live. You can look in my feed though and see a bunch of the trees that I climb on. So that'll give you an indication. So when you're looking at unions from the ground to tie into, of course, the ideal way of finding a union would be any union that's substantial in diameter and has a more natural, union, the U shape to it, of course. Okay? If it's an inclusion, especially like this, or opposite, in all the classes you'll take, they'll say stay away from those. They're dangerous, and they can be. They definitely can be. I'm not trying to minimize that. Unfortunately, I really don't have much option. That's like everything that I can tie into on these trees. But here is the thing. You do need to use a little bit of judgment of what you're tying into, what area, with what kind of tie-in you're doing, one. And two, that it's tested fully. Okay? So, in certain trees out here, especially like willows, because they're super, super brittle, or maples, okay? I often advance my tie-in point once I'm in the tree, first off. So that means that when I'm tying into picking a tie-in point from the ground, I won't always pick my optimal tie-in point for the tree work being done, okay? So I'm going to look for a substantial union. Even if it's an included union, I'm going to look for something that is substantial, because if it's an included union and it's more substantial, it's most likely going to handle you better than a small branch that's, included. So once again, it becomes this ratio of what is ideal versus what is practical. And then what's not so practical in form might be a little bit more practical based on the structural girth of it, if that makes any sense. Okay? I hope that makes sense to you guys. I'm trying to explain this as thoroughly and openly as possible. And then once I get to that point, so here's a great thing about having two lanyards, and this is just the way that I do it. Because like my device in my bridge, you have your bridge length plus your device, you have a bit of headspace there. So getting your device up to where your tie-in point is can be a little challenging at times. So what I do is even if it's the same union, I'll throw one lanyard over it and I'll hit thrust up to get me as tight as I can to that union, so that I can get to the next branch union and get myself stood up better with my second lanyard while I still have my main tie-in point in place. Why? Because if any of those smaller unions that I haven't been able to pull test from the ground break, I have two backups in that scenario. And some people say, oh, it's not necessary. Well, in the trees that I climb, it can be. And in fact, I have had two lanyards break off simultaneously on different unions, and then my main tie-in point catch me. Okay? That was the one point that I could actually test from the ground. So before I get in the tree, I do a few things. First off, I choose the tie-in point. Then I'm going to choose how that tie-in point is going to actually be tied off. So like on a locust or an elm tree or even a cottonwood, if it's a big union, a basal tie is not a big deal. A base tie is going to be fine for most of those. Now, that being said, you don't want to be overconfident, right? But as a general rule, as long as the root structure of the tree, there's no big hollow in the tree, is, found, then you're off to a good start, okay? So then once you set the tie-in point the way that you want it, so basal anchor or top anchor or whatever, then you go to a pull test. And for me, a pull test isn't significant to step 5 feet back from the tree and pull. That's not significant for me. No, I'm going to get 20 foot back approximately if I can. And I am going to yard on this. In fact, sometimes I get my my helper, my groundy, to grab it and we both yard on it, especially if it's a tree in an area that might not have good root stability. So like out here, Western Colorado, we have a lot of like sandstone under there, you know, the traditional mesas like in the cartoons where it's all these jutty canyons and stuff. We have a lot of that. And so you know that 6 inches or a foot under the soil, there's a bedrock of sandstone. Plus, the dirt itself is like this sandy clay. And if we haven't had rain in a while, it gets really loose. So you want to be careful. So we really yard on these things from about 20 foot back and really pull on them. If the tree sways a few times, and here's another tip. Don't just pull on it once and see if it does anything. Like, pull on it, get that thing swaying, let it go back, and then yard on it again and see if that added momentum does anything to the tree. If you start to see the base or the root flare or any of that start to move, stop and get out of there. Figure out a different way to handle that tree, okay? Real quick antidote about all this. We had 54-mile-an-hour winds last night and a bunch of trees came down. One of them was a locust, which I consider to be one of the most stable and structurally sound trees in the area. And it was a fully like healthy tree looking at it. Had about a 10.5-inch trunk. I totally would have thrown a line up in it and pulled on it to climb it. I mean, I wouldn't have had a problem at all. But the wind blew it over, roots and all, last night. Part of it was because of where it was planted and whatever. But the point is, I would have never thought in my mind, I wouldn't have even imagined that that particular tree would have been one of the weak trees that, you know, that would have come over. And if 54-mile-an-hour winds can push it over, your body weight moving in the arc and that momentum behind it can do the same thing as well. Colaric says decay resistance. Yeah. So you have to, don't ever walk up to a tree and just think, it's good. Okay. Now, the one time where pool tests and stuff become a bit more of a challenge is if it's a tree that you're going to spike and for some reason you can't get a line up in it. And I have done that. I try to avoid it with all effort because it's not a very safe practice to just start spiking up a tree and not know if it can hold that. Because as a general rule, so it gets even more compounded. As a general rule, the trees that's the case, most of the limbs have shed off because it's so dead. So now it's just really sketchy. If I have a neighboring tree, I will set a line in the neighboring tree before I start spiking. But that's not always the case in a yard around here. So that's the one time where tie-in points and stuff become a bit different, and kind of keep that in mind. So there are some exceptions to this conversation, but there shouldn't be many, to be honest with you. So pool test. All right. Then once I've done a pool test, I put my, I have my saddle on and all that stuff. I actually like run the line through my device and I pull up as I jump so that it gives me some distance off the ground. Just a few inches is all you need. I put my knee and my foot ascender on it and I start jumping up and down on the line, because the force downward in a union, especially if it's an included crotch, is even different than trying to pull the whole tree this way. So let's say the union's like this and it's a deep inclusion and you've done the pull test this way and it's fine. It's very different than the rope being jammed downward trying to slice it in half, if that makes sense. Art Pacific says, how do you look at the joint broadcast? Let's share our experience. It's very interesting to listen to how your arborist works. If I can answer to direct, maybe another time, Arbor Pacific. I appreciate the offer, but we'll do some of those in the future. I usually have conversations with people that are going to be on live with me, so I appreciate that. So yeah, keep keep that in mind that you don't just, well, at least I don't want to just do a pull test, but I also want to do a jar test to see how it's going to react, okay? Then if I'm still not super convinced, like if my inclusion looks more like this, so here's the main trunk and here's the branch, and this is very common in aspen trees because they're so weak, I will actually pull laterally. So I will literally be trying to rip this branch off of the union to make sure that if it doesn't come off like that, then it's most likely not going to come off when I'm moving around in the tree, because you're almost never straight up and down or just forward and backwards, if you want to call it that. You're almost always moving out to edges, and I want to make sure that union is going to hold me at all directions, okay? That's just me though. I know some guys are fine with just doing a pull test and then they get up in the tree. I don't particularly like that, but and I recommend the more testing you can do on it, the better. Now this also goes with top ties. Okay, so top ties, once again, you're going to put your top tie up there. We're going to be talking about some top anchoring and top ties in the future, because there's a number of options, and one of the options I've been using recently I haven't really liked. In fact, Zach Richards, he's got an eye like a hawk, man. He's always scouring my photos, and he's like, dude, your slick pin on your quickie was the wrong direction. And he's right, it was. It was because we set a 55-foot top anchor, in, and I couldn't, we sent it up with the pin the right way, but it rolled over. And then I couldn't see it from the ground, how it was oriented. And I climb up there, and now the pin's like pressing against the trunk. And if I'm not mistaken, Ben with Parkway Tree, wasn't it you that did the test on how easily those things get pushed out of the quickie, the slick pins? Do you remember what the force on that was? Can you put that up in the chat? But we're going to talk about other options and how to kind of watch for that stuff in the future, okay? So now I'm going to tell you, quite frankly, because of the kinds of trees that I get called out to do a lot, I do a lot of deadwooding and removals in tight yards, like really tight yards. And I'm one of the few climbers in town in this region. Almost everybody else uses bucket trucks or lifts, and they don't want those on their lawn a lot of times, or they just won't fit. I have to climb some pretty sketchy stuff. So sometimes they'll have branches, but the branches are super brittle, and I cannot trust them. Now, there's a couple of factors to keep in mind that kind of help me get through it mentally. One is that almost never is my tie-in point the last union before the ground, if that makes sense. So usually, if I'm in a union up here, and it's kind of brittle and potentially going to break, there's another union that the rope is going to fall into further down. It might be 4 feet, which would definitely be a scary moment, but it's there, if that makes sense. So if I'm dealing with super sketchy stuff like that, one trick that I use is, because I have a really long lanyard, so I carry a 20-foot lanyard on me. I can throw it around a lot of trees, and it hangs loose, and as I'm climbing, I advance the lanyard with me if I'm on a sketchy tree that I'm afraid that union's going to break out. That way, if it does break, hopefully my lanyard will catch on one of those branches coming down, and it'll stop me, even if my climbing rope comes fully out. Matthew asks, could you touch on tie-in point for spruce trees and pine? I see a lot of people doing basil anchor. Yeah, so I do both. It depends. There's some... So experienced climbers with like pine trees and spruce, depending on the kind of fir or the spruce, if it's separate enough but dense enough where they're almost ladder height, a lot of guys will just double lanyard up. And that's not terrible, but the problem with that is that you haven't been able to pull test the tree. That's the problem, right? And never underestimate the amount of, let's go back to leverages and tip over points of trees. How thick is the average wedge that you put in a tree to fell it? Think about it real quick and let me know. Let me grab something. I'll be right back. It's a good fear, but it depends on the brand. I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to say it in a way that should make you overly confident. But I gotta say, most branches, if you, this gets into another part we're going to talk about a little bit more, but the closer you are to the trunk, the stronger it's going to be and the harder it's going to be to break, if that makes sense. So if you like have your lanyard wrapped around the trunk of the tree and it's over like 2 branches that are this big, it's going to take a lot for that stupid thing to, those branches to break under your weight. So BZ Arbor Care says, I find the top of pine and spruce isn't good enough for canopy tie. Basil tie provides more compression into the stem, in my opinion. So be careful with statements. I mean, you're right, Brian, in certain ways, but be careful. It depends on the structure of that tree too. This is where it gets really sketchy and it's hard to go over all the details. You have to use some principles here. It depends on if the tree is a codom. It depends on if it's a mono, it's just one single stem all the way up. Some of the dense spruces out here, and even some of the white firs that are like 160 foot tall, I take a big shot. I take a 12 or 16 ounce bag and I shoot it as high as I can, as close as I can to the stem, the trunk. It comes down through the needles and everything on the back side. I tie it off as a basil and I pull test and pull test and pull test before I get in it. And the truth of the matter is that I'm tied over a whole bunch of branches that are only like this big, but the volume of those branches is what gives me the strength that I need. Because there's no way in the world I could like single out a branch up there where I need to be. That's really common with the ponderosa pines and the white firs out here. It's not ideal. I have had I was in one day. I had done a bunch of pull testing on it. And it was over like the top of the tree. It literally went over the top of the tree. The tree was about 100 foot tall, I guess. And my line was all the way on the outside of the tree, over and down. And I had it tied off basil. And you could see the branches bending over when I stood on the line. It was just, and I ended up breaking about 3 foot of branches off because there was no other way to climb this tree. And I was about halfway up when it broke the 3 feet of branches. So yeah, it was not a fun time. Those are those moments where you start to think of yourself and what you've done and why you even climb trees, to be honest. But it worked out. I got up there. I was able to trim them out, and it made it look okay. But yeah, it really depends on the maturity of the tree and the kind of tree. Most guys are either climbing them within the interior, like ladders, or they are just basiling over the whole outside of the tree and then digging their way in once they get up to where they want to be, at least as far as I know. And that's the 2 methods that I've used. Now, if it's a big enough like ponderosa pine or a Douglas fir, then there's often enough interior space to throw a line up even with a big shot and break through all that nasty little dead in there and go over a substantial sized branch. I mean, out here, ponderosa pine branches can get 14 inches in diameter or 16 inches in diameter, no problem. So it really depends. And they get up to around 160 foot-ish. Bear with me. I'm behind on a couple of comments. So Healthy Happy Tree says basil ties are putting 2 times the force on any tip tie-in point compared to canopy ties, though. Yeah, it's true. They are. So you just have to take in that factor to it. That's it. That's why I select carefully each time whether I'm going to do a tip, a canopy tie or a basil tie. Problem with spruces and firs are, at least the ones we have out here, they're so dense. There's no way you'd spend 3 days trying to single out branches to put a top tie in, a canopy tie. So I don't, on a lot of those, I just don't even bother with it because it's not practical. I'd lose more throw lines and I'd still have to climb it. But if I can, I will on a lot of that stuff, especially if it's something that's fairly fragile up at the top. Colaric says, take courses and learn a good understanding of how trees grow and deal with decay, and you will be a better arborist. Oh, for sure. I think a big part of it's knowing your local trees, because that's going to determine what kind of tie-offs you can use and what kind of unions are safe. So just to give you an example, I regular climb on sub 3-inch diameter branches, like regularly, all the time. And we're talking 80 foot up on a cottonwood or a willow tree even. But I've learned how to set my lines in a way that even if it's 2.5 inches, it's got a specific kind of force on it that it's not pulling on the branch as much as it's pulling on the stem of the trunk, and that makes a huge difference, and I can get away with it. If I tried to do it other ways, I might get myself in trouble. So that's where I'm careful as to what I say and suggest, because a lot of it has to come down to your experience and knowing the tree that you're climbing in, if that makes any sense. Matthew says, I totally get that. Parkway Tree says, yeah, it was not a measured force, just a hammer. Yep, that's it. It had good strength on the slick pin plunger of the quickies. Oh, plunger of the quickies. The video is still up, but really, it just gave us a good feel for hardware. Yeah. Good point. So definitely go check out Parkway Tree's video on the quickie and the slick pin, or the quick pin, the nub that sticks out with the 2 latches, how easily that goes in, okay? Conquistador, the Useless says, Strider Tree does a great video on YouTube of some of the differences of a canopy and basil. Yeah, he shows the different forces and scenario is of where one might be better than the other. Exactly. So on a lot of my sketchy willows, on a lot of my sketchy cottonwoods or aspen trees are a almost normal go-to is a canopy tie for me. Eric said, but I think the advantage of basil tie on conifer is that it's easier to set the line versus canopy, and basil also gives your rope a chance to catch another union in the event of a TIP fail. Yeah, these are all, some people will never agree with what you do, okay? It's just a fact. If you're looking for confirmation from everybody, forget it. Stop climbing, or just don't talk about climbing, okay? I have instructors that are friends of mine that own instruction, tree climbing and work at height instructional institutes in the U.S. that climb the same way I'm describing with these pine trees. You would have to break off a ton of that tree to hit the ground. There's no way that's going to happen. You would be more likely to have your rope shed off the canopy if it was to go wrong, and that would be a concern. But not really break enough if you're over like the majority of the tree. I mean, you know how many hundreds of branches you'd have to break before, and they're all so close together. It's not like a 10-foot drop each time. It's like 2-foot drop on white firs, or, So keep in mind, guys, this is just some of the ways that things are done and that some people do it, but you've got to decide for yourself if it's worth it or not. Biggest part about choosing a tie-in point, biggest part about testing a tree, Okay? Before you select a tie-in point, before you pull test the tree, all right? Look at the tree. If you feel like it's outside of your scale, forget it. Don't pick a tie-in point. It doesn't matter. It's outside of your scope. Let somebody else climb the tree. Eventually you'll get there. But don't climb outside of your scope. It doesn't matter how much you've studied or looked or thought or whatever. If you don't feel confident with it, you're going to make bad decisions. I do what I feel confident with. And what I always recommend is that if possible, you pick the best unions that are not included, if possible. You pick the biggest unions, if possible. And you climb with a backup on you, like a lanyard of some sort, if it's really sketchy stuff. Okay? That's the best I can do for you. Everything else is subjective to what you feel comfortable with. Like when I first started climbing, me tying off on a sub 3-inch union was like not going to happen. You know, there was no way. I was climbing, you know, these trees, and I'd get up to where it was like 5 inches in diameter, and that's as high as I would be willing to tie off on when I first started climbing. Now, you know, 3.5 to 2 3/4 inches. Some of them 2 inches is all I want, and I'm fine with that. But it's because I plan my rope and things that if it does fall, I know where it's going to go. And I also do backups a lot. Like if you watch the video that I just put up recently that was talking about the maple tree I was in, the tree had been topped. All the stuff that I was tying in on was new growth, relatively speaking. And I didn't feel super confident that it wouldn't just randomly break because these maple trees are very common to do that. So what I did is I had my basil rope, you know, my basil tie coming through a union, and then I took a sling, a loop runner with a carabiner on it, and girth hitched it around the main stem, so the vertical, which is stronger, of course, and I clipped the carabiner through the rope through my carabiner, so that if that union of that branch did fall off or shear, then that girth hitched on the vertical stem loop runner would catch me. Okay, so it was just a backup. The thing about tree climbing is, ideally you would never have an incident where your tie-in point fails, but that's hard to guarantee even with the best of climbers, because we're dealing with organic structures that you can't read the interior of. You can do the best you can to guess at it. You can do the best you can to do some visual inspection of it. You can do all these things. But the fact of the matter is, you don't know for certain that the heartwood is good. You don't know for certain there hasn't been wind fracture in there. You don't know for certain, like on a evergreen, that there's not pockets of sap that have built up. You don't know for certain that there's not underlying wounds in there that have weakened this tree. You can argue it all you want, but you can't guarantee anything. So if I feel very uncomfortable with things, I'm going to set up a emergency plan for that. It might be the branch union below that I feel is more than adequate. It might be that I do have an extra line on me, like my lanyard, almost always around something that I feel would be a good support. Yeah, lightning damage from years prior is a super sketchy thing, because the tree is all splintered and junk. And then woundwood's over, but it's not super solid in there. I've seen that. I actually, my friend put his lanyard around something and was just barely hanging on, and a 20-foot branch just sheared off, and you could tell that it was where a fracture had occurred in the past, and woundwood had healed over, and then, you know, a branch grew off of it, and his little, I mean, he was only 150 pounds or something, and his weight just pulled that whole end off, I mean, completely. So yeah, do your tests though. Do your pull test, do all that stuff. Now, it becomes even more challenging in redirects or advancing your tie-in point while in the tree. So here's a couple of ideas for you. One, I actually test them while in the tree, but I make sure my lanyard is around a main tie-in point, or something much more substantial, or at least a different branch. So let's say that I'm trying to get out to the tips and prune up, and I need a more overhead angle, so I set a redirect out there, right? We'll get into redirects because not all redirects are equal, and not all redirects are as advantageous, depending on what you're climbing and how you're climbing. Okay. Healthy Happy Tree says, what are your strategies for working a brittle multi-stem tree or with codominant leaders? Where are you using redirects? So that's a good question. It really kind of depends on the tree, but a lot of times in those cases, first off, I'm going to keep my line, if I'm going to use a union of the tree, I'm going to keep my line as close to the trunk, not out 6 inches, not out 4 inches. It's going to be like in the union. Okay, moving your rope out on a branch, even 3 inches, makes a huge difference on what that branch can handle as far as your weight goes. Okay. Second off, I'm probably going to carry some really long slings with me, or an adjustable friction saver, which is like my favorite thing to carry. And I'm going to try to choke off on the stem as much as possible. And when possible, and when I don't feel that it's going to put the multi-stems in excessive compression to where one might fracture and break, because if they're dry and brittle, you have to be careful that too much pressure in negative compression will potentially fracture it, if that makes sense. So when that's the case, I will actually like tie the two together sometimes. Sometimes I'll use a long adjustable friction saver or one of my lanyards and like cinch them together so that they can't separate easily, which doubles the strength, kind of, if that makes sense. It's not quite double. It depends on how strong one is versus the other or whatever. But then I feel more comfortable hanging off of one because they're now tied together. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? If you look back through my photos, you'll see a sketchy cottonwood that I took down, and my client took photos of me doing it. And you'll see that I have a adjustable friction saver connected between the two, tying them together. And that way, that was the only way I was going to be able to climb off of that multi-stem and get the height that I needed to get out to all the branches. Healthy Happy Tree, let me know if that made sense or not. And if I didn't answer enough, let me know what I didn't answer that you were wanting to know. Matthew says, I had a white pine 80 foot tall and it broke 20 foot off the ground. The center was filled with brown rot. Yeah, it's, so that's awful, man, to be frank. But the fact of the matter is that at least that had rot in it. The worst ones are like willow trees and maple trees. They don't have any rot or anything, and there's very little rhyme or reason, but they'll just like randomly snap on you. The tops of like a lot of maple trees, even so, I know a guy who was climbing a maple, and it was like 4.5 inches in diameter, and it looked completely healthy, no shelling, bark, nothing. You wouldn't have ever thought this is going to be an issue. The whole top, like I don't know, probably a 30-foot top just broke out of the tree with his tie-in point on it. And thankfully, he didn't die, but it put him out of work for a little bit, and I can't fault him. Looking at the tie-in point that he had, I would have picked it. It was just an unfortunate circumstance. Once again, certain species of trees are just less predictable. And the other factor to keep in mind is that if you're tied into a top and the top breaks out, even if you have a secondary, like let's say you have a snake anchor from ART, or let's say you have a sling of some sort, like a rigging sling up there, and that's your secondary, it may or may not be sufficient to handle your dynamic fall plus the weight of the top that your tie-in point is trapped in. Does that make sense? So you have to kind of take the best case scenarios, but know that there's a particular situation where you just might not be able to do anything about it. It's just part of what we do for a living. Catch Maria is very hard to detect, but is common in maples. Yeah, very true. So just, always plan for the best safety scenario and know that it may not always be sufficient to handle what the tree does, and there might not be anything you can do about it. Right? So I don't mean to sound like a Debbie Downer. Sorry, I don't mean to be like negative, but it's a fact that we have to deal with. But making good decisions about tie-in points and testing them is very important. So, like if I'm going to do a redirect to get up to the tops, because I do a lot of thinning and crown pruning, and now we're talking like I'm on branches that are only like an inch or an inch and a half in diameter. And you're like, how in the world will that even hold you? You're 235 pounds with all your gear on. It's because I do multiples. I do like tons. And the shared force helps keep all of that together. ¿Cómo está, Javier? So it's... Matthew says, my biggest fear is falling or having the tree break. Well, sorry, man. How can I don't mean to be unsympathetic. I think that's the biggest fear that really separates people from continuing the industry and being really good climbers and not. For me, I just kind of, I get busy doing things, right? And I forget about it. After I'm up there and it's working a little bit, I just kind of forget that there's that potential because I've swung around a little bit. I always recommend new climbers, if you can. When you're fearful of a tree, set a safety tie-off point that's a little bit lower than where your top tie is if you're afraid the top tie is not going to be, or that top point is. And that'll give you a little bit more confidence because if it breaks, if the branch breaks, the union splits, whatever, you're going to feel like that next one's going to handle and hold you better, right? And then take a few minutes to swing around in the tree. Like seriously. When you're on the ground before you ever get in the tree. Jump up, pull up the slack, get yourself off the ground a little bit. After you've done your pull test and everything, swing a little bit if you can. Just get the feel. If you're like swinging out 10 feet and this thing isn't breaking, you're going to be a lot more confident up in the tree, okay? When you get to redirects, this is a whole different mentality. When you get to redirects, I think if you ask anybody that's a good climber that uses redirects regularly, they all have a section of their brain that just says, this might break, but I have enough backup that if it does break, I'm going to be okay. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, Matthew? Does that help at all? Let me know. So, yeah. And what I often do with redirects as well is I choose my redirects very carefully. Like I'll wrap rope around to give compression where I want compression. Or I'll make a semi-dynamic connection point versus a dynamic connection point and various things. We'll get into a bit of this in the future. Matthew, no problem, really, man. You need to hit me up on DM. I'll make you a deal on some consulting. I think that you would benefit from that. Seriously, just me and you talking. I think I can help you out with some of your fears. And I think I can get you some gear that will make you feel more confident. And I can help you with some techniques that will make you more confident. So let's talk about it. And I think the money you would spend would make it worth your while. Okay? Just throwing it out there for you, bro. Just hit me up with a direct message, all right? So yeah, there's a lot to this. Ben, did I miss anything? I'm sorry, man. I've kind of gotten on some of these details, and I don't know that I covered everything that I had in mind. Does it sound like it's pretty well covered, Ben? Sorry, guys. I'm just waiting on Ben to respond to that last. But yeah, so definitely one big thing, though. I do want to mention this. It took me a while before I started tying off at the tips of branches. So I'm not talking about the top. I'm talking about branches. And you'll see, like in some of my videos. So hold on. Ben from Parkway says, look at your throw line shots from every angle. From the front, it can look like a straight up and down center. And from the back, it could actually be a sideways limb that you are setting it. Yeah. Definitely that. So when you mentioned that, I didn't really think about orientation of tie-in points, but you're totally right, Ben. So that can be, what Ben mentioned is both a pro and a con. Okay? So it can be a pro if you're trying to get to the outer edges of lower canopy areas to work for thinning and deadwooding. You might want a branch that's actually kind of a lead or whatever that's kind of coming out at an angle, maybe. But if you want to work more of the tree in an area without that, then you want to look for the most central. And what it looks like is central from the front may not be central at all. It may actually be leaning towards you, coming out like towards you, but you can't see it. So you need to go around the side and look at it, because it might actually be coming out at an angle, and now you're going to be hanging 10 foot away from the trunk, if that makes sense. So that's what I think Ben is saying. So you've got to look at it from all angles. Plus, once you've made your throw line shot, check it again, because it's amazing how many little branches you didn't notice might have been in the way of your throw line shot. You thought it was the perfect shot. And then you find out that there's like a piece of serious dead that if your line sits on it and it breaks while you're climbing, the distance between that dead branch to where it would land in the union could drop you like 6 feet. And that's a significant drop. I'll give you a quick experience that I had. And it got compounded to be even worse by another factor. So I was trying to climb a 100-ish foot cottonwood that had been topped 3 times. Everything was hollow in it. I mean, absolutely everything. There was only really one good tie-in point for that tree to get to the canopy that I needed to deadwood and thin. And from the backside, I couldn't see just the way the branches and unions were, because it was multi-stem, codominant. And I shot my line, and I looked at it from 3 angles what I could see, and it looked fine. But I couldn't see it from the backside, and there just happened to be a dead branch up there. And the line, evidently, from what we can tell where it was rubbing on it, had like it was like 4 inches out from where the branch made it to the trunk, if that makes sense. And so I did pull test and everything on it. I did everything on it. And it didn't break. I got on the rope, jumped up and down. It didn't do anything. And I was fine. The local newspaper photographer saw me climbing this tree and decided that it would be a cool photo for the newspaper, the local newspaper. So she comes over and explains what she's doing, and I was still on the ground. I was like, fine, I'm about to get in the tree, and you can watch if you want. And she says, good, and she's sitting there, and she's kind of like watching me at first because she didn't want to just take a photo. She wanted to understand what I was doing, right? And then she could take a better photo. And I'm explaining it to her, and I just told her about all the tests that I had just done and everything, right? And I get up on the line, I start climbing, and I kid you not, I get exactly 5 foot up well, not exactly, approximately 5 foot up, and that dead limb broke off, and it fell 6 feet, and I landed flat back on a sidewalk with the photographer standing right there watching me, right? And I mean, flat back on a sidewalk. It was awful. It was like knocked the breath out of me. My chainsaw slammed. The case was busted. It just, not good. And then, of course, she makes a quip about me being safe, right? We talked about it a little bit more, and she was just joking. She actually ended up taking a photo and putting it on the cover of the local newspaper anyway, and said some good things about me, which was nice. But the truth of the matter is that if I had been an extra foot or two higher on the line before it broke, I would have never hit the ground. I would have come down and I would have stopped a few inches from the ground or whatever. But it just broke at the right time. And even though I had tested and tested and tested, it let go. And I've replayed that scenario. I've replayed that tie-in in my head so many times. And I've even gone back and visited that same tree and looked at it. And I still can't see how I would have seen the issue that occurred from the ground. So I don't feel like I missed something. Well, I did miss something. But I don't feel like it was within my control. It was just something out of my control that occurred. And it just happens. It was a day that shook me up pretty good, right? We've all had them. The question is, are you gonna stop with that? And if you do, that's fine. If that's too much for you, then you really don't need to keep climbing. You need to get out of it. Because if your mind can't separate that from getting your job done safely, it's probably not good for you to keep getting in trees. But if you can say, well, it was just a 1 in a million thing, it might happen again, but I really doubt that it's going to happen like that again. And you can justify it out of your head and you can feel comfortable, get in trees, go climb, be a productive arborist, and, enjoy doing something that helps your neighbors, makes you a decent living usually, and is keeping you in shape, right? But there's no guarantees in this industry. There's none. We talk about ideal situations all the time, how to cut stuff, how to do this, how to tie in, how to set work positioning, all this stuff. And the fact of the matter is, even with all those rules, even with all those guidelines, you can't 100% guarantee a non-accident day. You can guarantee a much less chance of an accident. Maybe you took that 30% risk factor of an accident and you've narrowed it down to 1% risk. But there's pretty much always going to be that 1% risk. So just know that, okay? I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to let you know you've just got to have the mentality. That's just how it is. And you've just got to get past it. It's like if you focus on all the wrecks in automobiles every year and deaths, are you going to keep driving? Maybe not. I know that lots of people die in automobiles. I've seen the numbers, but am I going to quit driving? No. I'm just going to do my best to be a safe driver, right? And that's the idea. So I hope that kind of helps with the tie-in point stuff and the testing tie-in points. Start off, first off, trying more secure tie-ins and work up to sketchier ones. Continually critically analyzing the situation is a professional skill that is required for a career like this, for sure. It's really a skill that should be for any career. But yeah, especially in any kind of risk factor. I've worked in a bunch of them. Metal fabrication, work at heights for installing signs off of cranes, over interstates, all this stuff. Still hates heights. Close eye and pray for luck. I guess that's one way of going about it. I prefer to make judicious decisions and educated guesses over just hoping for the best. But yeah, sometimes you do. To be quite honest, I have tied into a few branches to get out to the tips of a canopy to get deadwood, and it's like, I just hope this holds. And as soon as I can get my lanyard around something else that is more secure, I'm putting that lanyard on it, because I don't want to make that 30-foot swing back to the trunk because my, that tie-in point didn't hold, right? But it's part of the job. That's why they hire us. That's why, me personally, I get paid more money in this area than almost all the other arborist companies, because I make that happen. And there's another company in town that does the same, and they're really good at what they do, and I respect them highly. I was actually talking to them today and stuff. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes you just got to take a little bit of a risk. I try to minimize them as much as possible, though. Brian with BZ Arbor Care says the difference between a guy with truck and a chainsaw and professional is not as common as you might think it is. Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a lot to this, right? It takes critical thinking for sure. It takes a lot of analytics. So I was going to save this for another show, and I might do it in another show as well a little bit. But I think that there are 4 things every arborist should be doing that are not arborist oriented. A climber, I should say. Every tree climber. I think every arborist, period. If you're doing removals, large pruning, anything. 1, I think that you should be learning trigonometry and how force vectors and effects on leverage points work, right? There's a really cool program. I'm not sponsored by them at all, so don't take it this way. There's a really cool program. It's not super cheap. It's like $160 a year, but it's called brilliant.com or .org. I don't remember. I think it's .com. I think that you should be doing things that keep you physically fit outside of the tree, which I am pretty bad at, but I'm trying to get better. Riding bikes, cardio, some weightlifting, anything like core, like Pilates or whatever. And I think that you should be studying heavily the tree biology of the trees that you climb most predominantly. I think that all of that's important, and that includes root structure and how they interface with the kind of terrain and soil that you have in your area. I think that you should be studying how the wind factors affect the trees in your local area and stuff. And some of that you're going to have to just do through observation. I think all of that is super important for you to be a safe climber, and even a bucket operator if you're doing big rigging and things. B Monkey says a good rope setup is great too. Redirecting your rope before access. Yeah. Or pre-directing your rope before access. I agree. So, yeah, I think that you guys should be looking into those kinds of things as well. Are you an experienced climber? Take a climbing course. They will refresh your mind on certain things. Some of it you're going to be like, yeah, I know this, I know. But some of it, just being able to speak with the instructors will give you a huge eye-awakening scenario, because most of those guys are also included in the rescue of arborists in their local regions where they live, because they're certified rescuers, and they can tell you some stories and what occurred and how it occurred, and you're like, really? I would have never thought that. In fact, if everything works out, I'm trying to organize something with one of the instructors that gave me a North American Training Solutions course. His name is Travis Morales. He owns his own training company now, as well as working for North American Training Solutions, and he owns his own arborist company down in Destin, Florida. And super, super great guy, really nice to talk to, really cares about the arborist community. And he was super stoked on the idea of coming on the show, so hopefully we'll be able to work that out. And in the meantime, guys, I think you guys should go check out a new video that Zigzag Man, Zach Richards just put up. Go over to YouTube. I think his I think on zigzagman.zr on Instagram, he's got his YouTube link in his profile. Go check out the video he did on redirects. He talks about the redirects he uses most commonly and what he likes about them and some things to know. And here in the near future, we'll be doing a redirect video about static redirects, dynamic redirects, and semi-dynamic redirects. And what that means and how it can affect your climbing and when you might want to use one versus another. Okay? So I hope that kind of covers everything that we had planned. I hope it was beneficial for you guys once again. Brian says, I would very much like to get into rope rescue given my background. Yeah, if you can, do it. But here's another factor to think about. And once again, not discouraging, but I've had a lot of people tell me, I want to get into rescue work. And that's cool if you want to. And if you can handle it, do it. It's an intense, well, it depends on where you're at. But if you're doing like mountain rescue and like out here in Moab, Utah, a lot of people go do climbing. You know, they're climbing these big faces out here. And even here in Colorado, there's a lot of mountain rescue. People go on hikes and then they fall in ravines or off cliffs and then you have to go rescue them. It's intense, like seriously intense. Not just the rescue, but just the speed. You have to get all of that gear to the site of rescue is pretty intense. And you have to be physically fit for it, like seriously in good shape. On top of that, you don't know what you'll find when you get there. And it's pretty gruesome sometimes. Zephyr, that used to work with me. Hey, what's up, Julian? Zephyr, that used to work with me, he did mountain rescue in Moab. And especially in the summer, some of these hikers get lost or some of these climbers fall and they get trapped somewhere and then it takes a day or two to find out where they are. And sometimes by the time they found them, they're dead and you find a body that's pretty much being cooked in the sun. And what's really disturbing is sometimes sometimes you can actually like smell the body and it almost smells like beef jerky or something. And it's a really screwed up mental thing going on. Really, really messed up. So, yeah. Rescue is cool in a lot of ways. I don't know that I could handle it psychologically, to be honest. So just know, if you want to get into rescue, talk to some people first. Find out what the realities of it are, because it can be, for instance, Travis Morales, I'll ask him about it when he's on, if he comes on. He had to go get a guy that was up in a saddle that I think had died, if I remember correctly. He had cut himself with a chainsaw and he had to get the body down. So, you know, it happens. If you saw my post recently, the guy in Tennessee unfortunately passed away. That's another conversation I want to have later. But, you know, essentially it went from a rescue operation to a body recovery by the time they got to him. And he was slumped down in the bucket of the lift with his throat cut and dead. I mean, I'm not trying to be graphic and gross, people. I'm just saying that's the kind of stuff you deal with. And if you get into rope rescue, which I really recommend doing, it's always good to know it. Just know that it's not always for the pleasure of saving somebody's life. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's simply because it needs to be done and it's not an ideal situation that you're walking into. So, yeah, it's something I'm taking some course. I'm going to take some courses on it. I'm going to try to get certified as a rescuer for tree work out here, but I don't know that I want to do mountain rescue. I've heard some stories, and that might just be a little bit more than I can psychologically handle. But that's just me. So yeah, thanks everybody for stopping by. I will be doing a review, of course, on the Chicane and on the Zigzag Plus. Once again, this is the Zigzag Plus. It has the swivel. And I hope the conversation today was interesting and beneficial. I appreciate all the support that you guys are giving me. If you feel so inclined, please don't forget to check out my Patreon page. You're not just helping me, you're literally helping the community by that page if you become a member. You get recognized on, of course, all of my videos and my lives. Thanks, Ian0251. I appreciate it. You guys all have a good night, and I will talk to you guys all later. Brian, I look forward to this. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for the support. Really appreciate you being a Patreon member. And Matthew, please reach out to me. I hope that it's beneficial for you. Ben with Parkway, if you're still on. Yeah, thank you, man, so much. You've been such an awesome support. And thank you for the good topic. Thank you, Remote. I appreciate that. Anybody else have a topic that you want me to cover other than the ones that I've mentioned? Because I'm doing 2 lives a week, so there's plenty of topics to cover. Anybody got another topic you might want me to cover on another live? Chipper maintenance. Oh, man, nobody wants to talk about chipper maintenance. Span rigging, okay. Chipper maintenance, span rigging. All right, we can do that. So here's a quick tip for your chipper maintenance. Did you know that you're supposed to grease your chipper drum? No, grease the whole chipper. The feeder drum, the chipping wheel, and the sliders, you know, for the feed wheel. You're supposed to grease those once every day, or if it's running all day long, twice in the same day. Look at your maintenance manual. It'll say that, for most chippers at least. So, do I do that? Not as much as I should, but I'm trying to get better at it. So, hope that is a quick chipper maintenance guide for you guys. And those are good topics, Still Hates Heights and Brian. So I will keep those in mind, and we'll talk about them here in the future then. Thanks, guys. Take care. Have a very good evening. Please, seriously, take your time. Make sure that you guys are climbing as safe as possible, because I would really hate to know that one of my followers was no longer with us to follow because of an accident. You know, I mean, I know we can't all avoid them, and I try my best to avoid them as well, but please be safe out there. It really means a lot to me. Brian, I run an old school chuck and duck with a sealed bearing. Yeah, that's it, man. All right, take care, guys. Y'all have a good evening. Bye.